Well, like many foreigners, I was very disturbed on January the 11th, 2002, when Donald Rumsfeld gave permission for photographs that were taken by a soldier of these men in the orange jumpsuits with their eyes and their ears and their mouths covered, kneeling in the hot Caribbean sun with guards shouting at them and shackled. This didn't look to me like any recognizable form of detention that was internationally acceptable. I realized that the color orange and the hysteria that was prevalent at the time was more familiar to Americans, that the orange jumpsuits are familiar from domestic prisons. I didn't know that at the beginning. But around the world, that actually sent out a very damaging message, so that the conservative Daily Mail in Britain was calling it torture from the very beginning. And in Britain, we then realized as time went on, as small amounts of information came out of this place, which was in total lockdown for the first 2.5 years, really, until the Supreme Court ruled that the prisoners had habeas rights. It was totally closed to the outside world. The Bush administration could and did do anything they wanted there. These people had no rights whatsoever. And stories started to come out from British prisoners when they were released in particular. They spoke very eloquently about what had happened to them, and I got more and more interested. And I really began full-time working on this about 7 years ago. But what particularly motivated me really was partly that it was the United States that has such a prominent place in the world, and was fairly openly declaring to the world the existence of this place, even though they didn't want anyone to know anything about it, about how it worked, about who was held there. But that what they were doing there was so fundamentally wrong, and that needed to be combated. And I haven't changed my mind about that, and I never will. If you're going to deprive people of their liberty, and you're going to claim that you're any kind of civilized country, there are only two ways that you can do that. You accuse somebody of being a criminal, you arrest them, you accuse them of a criminal offense. Within as short a time as possible, you put them on trial, and if they are convicted, they are sentenced and sent to prison. The only other way you can deprive people of their liberty is if you capture them in a military context and you imprison them unmolested with the protections of the Geneva Conventions until the end of hostilities. Neither of those happened. As I say, these men were literally held without rights for 2.5 years, until in Rasool v. Bush, which Tom worked on, the Supreme Court said these men have no redress if, as many of them claim, they were captured by mistake. They have to have the right to do this, and this is the method that it should be. The other thing that happened is that between the 7th of February 2002, when President Bush issued an executive order claiming that the Geneva Conventions didn't apply to the prisoners in Guantanamo, until June 2006, when in Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, the Supreme Court said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, but any prisoner that you're holding has the minimum protections of Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, which guarantees that you cannot be tortured or abused." Between those two dates, the United States was happily torturing people because it claimed that they didn't have rights. So they're very, very, very fundamental issues that drew me into this and that keep me involved. And along the way, what happened was that I happened to be in place, and I hope had the abilities to be there when a huge amount of information was released through a Freedom of Information lawsuit by the Pentagon in 2006 of the names and nationalities of the prisoners for the first time, of 8,000 pages of the allegations and the transcripts of the tribunals and the review boards that took place at Guantanamo, and began this process of finding out who these prisoners were, and starting to tell their stories, and starting to be able to tell the world what I discovered in my research, that these guys were not the worst of the worst, but that through analyzing where and when they were captured and what was going on, to realize that most of them had been bought, that when most of them came to Guantanamo, nothing was known about them, almost nothing was known about them. And I've come to realize more and more as time has gone on, the story only gets worse the more research I do into it, really, that they knew nothing about these people and had to build up a story. And they did this, whether through torture or other forms of coercion, or whether through bribing prisoners, pushing people until they just said, "Look, I can't take this anymore. What do you want to hear? I'll tell you a story." That what purports to be the evidence against the prisoners is mostly statements that were made by their fellow prisoners, either in Guantanamo or in some cases in the black sites. Most of it is, are allegations that were made by quite a small number of prisoners, and that when you subject it to any kind of analysis whatsoever, any kind of objective analysis whatsoever, it falls apart. People are claiming that people were in places that they couldn't have been. The whole thing is a house of cards built on these false statements, extracted coercively in most cases, in some cases by bribing prisoners with better living conditions, but the whole thing is hollow and disgusting. And you know, that's why I got involved, that's why I'm still here trying to push these issues, because everywhere you look at this story, the kind of injustice that has taken place is horrible. And it's not an indictment of the American people that this happened, but it's an indictment of the American people that the crimes that are still going on continue to happen. Because this is, you know, this is the conscience of a nation should be at play here. It's a small number of people. It should matter how people are treated individually, but it's not just these individuals at Guantanamo, it's the principles that are at stake here. And we've been in a very, very troubling place for 11 years. And if this really does become the new normal, and, you know, and God forbid that in 4 years President Obama leaves office and still nothing has happened and the place remains open forever, that is such a profound stain on America's character that you know, I hope you realize the implications of that.
Tom.
Well, and